What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I am Chris. This is Watch Chris. Today we're talking about affordable icons. All of the watches that I'm going to mention in this video are under $1,000 and I consider them an icon. Now, what is an icon? These watches are watches that define their category and they've been around for a while. I think a lot of people would agree that these are icons because these are the watches that you think of when you think about watches, especially under $1,000. So I'm going to start with number one. Some of these at retail are under $1,000. Others, you have to buy them on the secondary market. So I will mention prices generally throughout the video, starting with number one, Nevada Grenchen. This is a watch that you could buy at retail under $1,000. And it is, of course, the Super Antarctic. An Explorer style watch for under $900, actually around $845. It was used in the 1950s for missions to the South Pole. It's an icon of Explorer style field watches and is actually affordable, and it gets an automatic SOPROD movement inside. It's the P024, which is a pretty reliable movement. 100 meters of water resistance, just a good looking, straightforward Explorer style field watch. And that's the reason why it's on this list. Next on this list is a watch that you could order off of Amazon and have it in your house by tomorrow. It is the Casio calculator watch. This is a watch that I think every kid out there who was remotely into watches, even if you weren't into watches, you knew what this watch was and you wanted one. It has a calculator, it's a watch, and you wear it on your wrist. That's really it. It's amazingly simple, but very, very cool. And I think the calculator watch is an iconic watch for Casio for many different reasons, but the main reason is that nostalgia. The next watch is an iconic bullhead chronograph that was made by Citizen in the 1970s. It's called the Tsuno. It was recently revived by Brad Pitt when he wore it in a very popular movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is a bullhead chronograph. It's quartz. There's a few that they're currently selling on the Citizen website that have angular cases. However, they've also made rounder, more organic shapes. Basically, a bullhead's chronograph is named that way because of the location of the crown and the pushers up at the top of the case. Right above the 12 o'clock position, you have the crown, and then on the sides of the crown, you have the pushers for the chronograph, so it looks like a bull's head. This is a very iconic looking watch, a very iconic watch for Citizen. You can get these watches for around $300, but they do make more complicated ones that cost more money. But the basic ones cost around $300. They're very iconic and very good looking watches. Timex make a number of iconic watches. However, for this video, I tried to narrow it down to one iconic watch that I find the most attractive, and I had to choose the Q Timex on the original bracelet that they came out with it when they re-released it just a few years ago. It's a really good looking watch that gets a Pepsi bezel. There's a whole bunch of different versions now, but I really like the original Pepsi bezel that they came out with the blue dial and that mesh bracelet, that folded stainless steel bracelet that pulls hairs and all of that good stuff. But I think it's a great looking watch. I think it's a very iconic looking watch. All in all, it's a really good looking watch from Timex. It's a really iconic watch from Timex. And that's obvious because they've made it in so many different iterations now. There is a ton of demand for the Q Timex, and it's definitely one of their most iconic watches ever. One of the watches that has helped me through my YouTube journey is the Seiko SKX. I bought an SKX and I put it through the ringer. I boiled it, I froze it, I put it in a washing machine, I put it in my oven, which pretty much killed it. However, I then modded that watch. It's really an icon for many different reasons. Not only the fact that it could take a licking and keep on ticking. I know that is not their slogan. However, it's iconic because of the people who have worn this watch. Professionals, people who wear it as a tool watch. Lots of divers swear by the SKX. It's affordable, it's good looking, it's an iconic Seiko. It's modeled after the Marine Master, it gets 200 meters of water resistance, it's ISO certified. You could still get them for around $500. And it was a lot of people's first dive watch and a lot of people's last dive watch because you really don't need more than what the SKX offers. So if you're talking about iconic watches under $1,000, you have to bring up Bulova. The first Bulova I'm going to bring up on this list is, of course, the Bulova Lunar Pilot. It's a watch that actually went to the moon, and that's why it is iconic. David Scott was the 7th man to walk on the moon and the first to drive the lunar rover on the moon's surface. The story goes that he had on his NASA-issued Omega Speedmaster. That watch failed, the crystal popped out. He was no longer able to use that watch. He used his personal watch, which was a watch that Bulova gave him. It was a chronograph meant to sort of replace the Omega Speedmaster, or at least that's what they were trying to do. They didn't win that contract, but Scott did wear this watch. His personal watch. It was a prototype of the Bulova Lunar Pilot, and he actually did some activities on the moon with that watch on his wrist. And that watch would go on to sell for millions of dollars at auction. Bulova didn't even know about it until the story came out later on. Now we have the Bulova Lunar Pilot reissue, which is their first actual production run of that watch, and it is definitely an icon. It's a great looking watch. They make it in a few different sizes. It's beautiful, and of course the Bulova Lunar Pilot deserves to be an icon. Next on this list is a watch that is probably the youngest icon on this list. It is the Tsuno PRX. Yes, this is a reissue, so I would say the original is not an icon. It's the newer version that came out just a few years ago, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago now, when they first came out with the PRX. That became an icon rapidly because it's an affordable watch. You can get these watches for around $300 to $500, depending on where you're buying them, if you want the automatic or the quartz. But it's the looks, the design of this watch made this the go-to affordable integrated bracelet watch for many, many people. It's become a favorite of collectors. It's definitely an icon. It's a young icon, but it's definitely becoming an iconic watch among collectors because of the amount of value it offers. Also, they are very good looking and pretty well made. Just a generally good sports watch. Next, we have a couple of watches that are iconic that cost under $1,000 from two of my favorite brands. Again, we're going to be talking about Bulova and Citizen. The Bulova on this list is the Devil Diver. The Devil Diver 666, one of the most iconic dive watches of all time, a barrel case. Obviously, the Devil Diver, that 666 on the dial is where it gets its name from. Very, very popular watches. They still make them today. They just recently reissued them. They're just an icon in diving. And then, of course, we have the ProMaster Dive Collection from Citizen. You can get these in Eco Drive, which is, of course, solar, and then automatic versions as well. This is more of a modern icon, similar to when I was talking about the PRX. However, they have been around for quite some time. These are very iconic as well. Really good looking, very functional, very affordable watches that people will immediately recognize as a Citizen ProMaster when you have one on your wrist. Just a good looking watch that is definitely an icon. Next, we have another Casio. It's the Casio World Time. This is a watch that I think every collector owns at some point. It's another one of those watches that you can get off of Amazon tomorrow. They cost sometimes around $30. Depends on what the sales are on Amazon, but you can buy these pretty cheap and you can get them very quickly. They're really good looking watches with tons of functionality for just a little bit of money. I actually oil filled mine, which I thought looked really cool, but you could mod these as well. Just great watches that are very affordable and also very fun. So you can see a little bit of a trend on this list. There are a lot of watches that I own or I have owned in the past, and the next watch on this list is a watch that I have owned and sold, and I still look at eBay auctions on almost a daily basis because I want to repurchase this watch. I regret selling it. It is an Eterna. It's the Eterna Kontiki. Now you're going to say to me, Eternas are pretty expensive. That is true. However, almost all Eternas sell for next to nothing on the secondary market. For one reason or another, they just aren't very popular. The Kontiki is an incredible dive watch with an incredible history. Thar Heyerdahl wore one across the Pacific, and he had a Kontiki on his wrist. He had an Eterna on his wrist. So there's a lot of history behind Eterna. You can get a Kontiki for under $1,000 on eBay very easily. You can get a modern one. You can get a vintage one. There's tons of them out there. Some of them are very expensive, especially when you're talking about vintage versions in really good condition. However, there are vintage versions that you can get for under $1,000, and there are modern ones that you can get for around $1,000 as well. Very cool watches, very iconic, and I absolutely love them. The next two watches on this list are two field watches that have proven themselves on the battlefield. We have the Bulova Hack, one of my favorite field watches that are extremely affordable. You can get these for around $400 and under. And then, of course, the Hamilton Khaki Field. These are both incredible icons, war heroes from World War II, but because they are also really great everyday watches, they're reissues which you can buy from Hamilton and Bulova today. They are just really great everyday watches. Their history is incredible. When you're wearing a Bulova Hack or you're wearing a Hamilton Khaki Field, you have one on your wrist, you know that those watches are tried and true. They have been battle proven, and they're amazing watches. For the price, you think about the history and all of that behind them. They are true icons in watchmaking. Definitely worth your money. The next watch on this list is the first GMT ever made. Some people think it's a Rolex. It's not. It's a Glycine Airman. Glycine is currently owned by Invicta. They still make these watches, so you can buy a Glycine Airman today, and they do make some that are very faithful to the original. In fact, extremely faithful to the original, and they're really inexpensive. They make tons of different versions. They're really well made. It's a surprise because they are owned by Invicta, but they do make some really great watches. Some of them aren't so great. There are vintage versions available that you could buy, but I definitely would buy a modern one because they are extremely affordable. Some of the vintage ones are worth a lot of money, and they are pretty expensive. If you don't want to spend all of that money, go for one that is currently being made by Invicta. Even though they're not made in the same factory as Invicta, you know, it's not that big of a deal. I think they are actually very well made and very good looking watches. And the Airman is definitely an icon. Okay, so we're down to the last four watches on this list. The next watch I'm going to mention is yet another iconic dive watch. It is the Zodiac Super Seawolf, a watch that came out in 1953 alongside the Blancpain 50 Fathoms and the Rolex Submariner. You could see why this watch is an icon of diving. The current versions that you can buy, obviously Zodiac is owned by the Fossil Group. Not my favorite, and a lot of Zodiacs I find to be slightly subpar when you're comparing it to other watches in their category, from watches like Seiko and Citizen. I think their overall quality isn't as good as those watches. However, they do discount pretty heavily, and they are technically Swiss made. So you can get a pretty nice watch from Zodiac for a very, very good price. And their quality is good, but just not as good as the other Japanese brands and maybe some of the Swiss brands that I just mentioned. The next watch on this list is a watch that you will not see on any other iconic list. I'm pretty sure it is the Hamilton Ventura. If you are not familiar with this watch, it was worn by Elvis, but it was also worn by Will Smith in Men in Black. I'm talking about the quartz version here because that is the most affordable. That is under $1,000. They do make automatic versions, some crazy versions as well that have some weird dials and lots of weird straps and things like that. They recently came out with a Dune version, which was kind of crazy as well. These are iconic watches. Lots of famous people wore them. They've been worn in movies, and obviously they are an icon just because they are weird looking watches, and they were one of the first to do this. Something off the wall, completely different, completely avant-garde. Just a really cool watch, and I definitely think that the Ventura is an icon. Next watch on this list is a vintage watch. It's a watch that I own. It is a Tag Heuer Professional 2000. I have a chronograph. It gets a La Manna movement. You can get these watches for under $1,000 all day long on places like eBay. I paid $600 for mine. It's working perfectly. I think it's a really good looking watch. It has gold cap on it, and it's a pretty heavy watch as well. They're really well made. And of course they are Tag Heuers from the 90s. A lot of people did not like these watches, but I really do think they're iconic. It's the reason why a lot of people have gotten into watches. Tag Heuer were one of those brands that were aspirational when you were a kid, when you were looking at watches and you were looking at magazines. you would see the Tag Heuer Professional 2000 being advertised, and you wanted one. I thought they were cool. I still think they're cool. It's kind of the reason why I bought one. For nostalgia reasons, I think it's an icon, specifically a 90s icon in watch collecting. Last but not least is another Seiko. This one is the SPB 239. It's a 62 mas reissue. So this is under $1,000. It's a reinterpretation, so a modern reinterpretation of the original 62 mas. They do this all the time, but you can get these for under $1,000, and they're a reinterpretation of Seiko's first dive watch. And you really can't get more iconic than that. When you're talking about dive watches, the first Seiko dive watch, extremely iconic. These look the part. They look very much like the original 62 mas. They are a little bit different, a little bit bigger and thicker and things like that, but they generally look like a 62 mas, and they are pretty affordable. Tell me what you think about this list. I've mentioned a lot of watches. I think it was around 16 or 17 watches that I mentioned on this list of iconic watches under $1,000. I know there are a lot of other watches that I could have mentioned. Please add those watches down in the description. I want to hear what you guys thought of my list, and if you find any watches that I missed, definitely add that watch down in the description. I'd like to hear what you guys think and tell me what I missed. Thank you for joining me here today. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys in the next video.